This video is dealing with the poem Storm on the Island by Seamus Heaney, particularly looking at, I think, the way it deals with the power of nature and the relationships between nature and humanity. Now, right from the beginning, let me get clear to you that many of you will have heard of an interpretation of this poem that does the rounds about it being about the Irish Troubles. Well, I quite clearly am not with that interpretation. This poem was written in 1966. Although there were issues in Ireland long before then, the Troubles, as we call them, didn't really start until the next year. So that doesn't work. And there are whole sections of it. I'd love to know how someone interpreting that could interpret the idea that we don't have trees to provide company, which takes up over a quarter of the poem itself. No, for me, this is a poem about a storm on an island. So what does it help us to know? First of all, that there are a number of islands off the coast of Ireland which only have a few inhabitants. They vary in how many they have, but they are battered by the weather fronts that come off the Atlantic Ocean because, of course, as you can see, if you look at them on a map, there is nothing between them and America across the Atlantic Ocean pretty much. So there's pretty much nothing that can be done to stop a storm like this. You can't stop the nature. You can only take sensible measures. You can only protect yourself in the best way you can. So let's take in what happens if that's the background. First of all, it starts with this idea of a group of islanders, and notice it is we, so it's narrated at that point from the point of view of a group, or at least from one of the islanders talking about them as a group. And it's all about how they can deliberately construct houses and areas around to protect themselves against this idea that they are going to get these storms. So showing a great deal of respect for nature from the outset. We're told that the island's got no hay or grass, therefore, and has no trees, and there's a bit of reflection on the impact of not having it. That comes across in the comment on how the noise that trees make in a storm can help, because at least you can hear what's happening. That moves into the sea, a comparison to say, well, we do have the sea, why doesn't that do the same thing? But it's because the spray of the sea spits at the window. They say it doesn't. And then we move into an extended metaphor of the wind as a fighter plane attacking the island. The final conclusion is that what they fear is a huge nothing because it can't be seen or heard. So the focus is very clearly on nature, and the title itself points out that first of all we've got two aspects to the storm. It's real, but it's also metaphorical. Metaphorical storms often represent the onslaught of something, whether it's emotion or whether it's bad, evil, something coming to get you. It's a sense that even though it is a real storm, there's something metaphorical about it as well in the way that they're trying to defend themselves against it. And then putting Ireland in the title as well emphasises the isolation that these humans have, being on an island and therefore having to deal with it themselves. So we're going to look at this in the two halves, I would identify. The first half finishing Forgetting It Pummels Your House Too. The 11th line, there are no trees, no natural shelter, I've placed with the second half, but it could be seen as almost a barrier between the two as well as being a vaulter. Anyway, we'll get to that as we reach it. We start with that very plain statement, we are prepared, and then follow it by a colon, and I'm going to explain to you how we're prepared. Okay? Simple and plain, that's the level of respect that they have. And that's the underlying thing here, isn't it? The respect. When then we get the list that follows the colon of what they do, we get to look at the extent of the measures that they have to take, and at the same time that presents us with a picture of nature. The idea that houses have to be squat, have to be almost personified, I suppose, therefore, crouching down against the wind, but almost ready to spring to life as needed. The idea of using the rock, making sure the slate is good, interacting with nature itself to make sure that they are protected, but also showing that respect. And then that word wizened, which again personifies the earth here as something that really has a sense of understanding what it's up to. The whole purpose, I think, of that opening is to set up for us, right, whatever else happens, and remember, we get to, there's no lessening of the fear because of this, but whatever we get up to, we are prepared, we are working with nature, because that's the only way that humans can survive. The respect is that they know that nature is the more powerful force. Now, this section on trees, as said here, is a strange section. I mentioned before, it takes up almost a quarter of the poem. It's very difficult to interpret. A quarter of this poem is telling you about something that isn't there, that they don't have. Now, why? Okay. I mentioned there that the first point is the personification of it. The personification of trees as companions. Trees are often personified. I don't know if it's because of the fact they stand upright, the branches, almost like limbs or whatever, or a sense that they stand tall as much as they can. But that's the first point. They are personified as potentially allies. And it's interesting that, of course, that's part of nature, because that comes into the idea of them being a tragic chorus. And the chorus in the Greek theatre, of course, were the kind of go-betweens between the audience and the actors on stage. They could interact with both, whereas the audience and the actors couldn't. So they would comment on the action, they would interpret it, they would react to the emotions of what's going on. And to place trees as a kind of middle ground like that, I think suggests how exposed they are, how much it's a case of the violence of the storm and the exposure of them, the storm and the island. And that's why I think it takes so much here. There's plenty of things you can do with tragedy. You can start to think, if this is like a tragedy, who are the actors, who are the audience? Yeah? Is the storm the actor, is us the audience, or the vice versa? And what does that suggest? And that's where I think you can go nice and deeply into this idea, the sense of the storm as a Greek tragedy. Greek tragedy always deals with inevitability, with the idea of fate and things coming along, but it also deals with a central character that makes a choice that leads to tragedy. So maybe that reflects more the choice of interacting with nature, of respecting nature, that actually stops it being tragic. Lots and lots in there. And finally, when it comes to the conclusion that that would mean you can listen to the thing you fear, you can actually hear the sound of the wind because of what it does to the trees. Forgetting it pummels your house too is one of the first examples here of a use of language that reminds us of the power of this storm. The storm hasn't come in the opening half, it comes of course in the second half. So this is just really getting us ready. The sense of it almost like a boxer that just keeps going at you, going at you, going at you, or going at your house anyway. So when we move into the second half, we have that initial link. There are no trees, there are shelter. And as I suggest there, you could reasonably ask yourself, well, then why are you living here? And to be honest, that actually maybe creates one of the issues behind the poem. The sense of why do humans live in extreme conditions? Why do they choose to live in places that are a battle, that are a fight to live in? But they do. And what we see here maybe could be seen as a testament to the hardiness of humans standing up against power like this. We could then pair it, as we say, with the later line, we just sit tight. When they're faced with power of this, all that you can do is just sit tight. And maybe that is as much as anything the point. It is a volta, it is a turning point, because it comes round, it takes us from this idea of what's not there into what is there and how you have to interact. Okay, so we get the sea. You might think the sea is company exploding comfortably down the cliffs. That oxymoron introduces the sea as this casually violent player. And then when the storm really gets going, it goes beyond that oxymoron. Okay? That beautiful oxymoron, really, of the violence next to the casualness. And the fact is introduced with this, but no, the dramatic, bit like we are prepared at the beginning. It's the understanding of this, that the spray spits like a tame cat turned savage. A really intense simile that I would think you'd spend time on here. The sense of a pet that becomes something wild again. The sea is like a pet to them. Around them is wildness, okay? And the sea takes the side of the wildness when it comes. I suppose it's understanding, like you would if, as a cat owner. You understand that cats aren't really tame. They seem that way. There is always that side underneath them, and you need to, again, be ready and respect it, I suppose. I'm not a cat person, so forgive me if that's a wrong interpretation of it. But I think that's quite interesting, especially with the idea of spitting out at you. Some kind of spitting is a very vindictive thing to do. It's got no real purpose. It's just nasty for the sake of it. So we deal with the lack of trees. We deal with the sea and the danger it poses. And then we end with the attack. The extended metaphor. The wind as some kind of air attack coming in at you. So, it dives and strafes invisibly. It's the space that it has there is like a salvo. We are bombarded by the empty air. 3 ideas that come in there. And what you've got, as they say there, is the balance between, in blue there, the attack words. Diving and strafing, what air bombers do when they dive in and then move along and pull back up again. Coming in to attack. Very difficult to stop. A salvo, a succession of shots fired off at once. A bombardment. Masses and masses of attacks, of bombs or shells or whatever thrown at you, one after the other, constant. This is a dangerous attack, but next to it is the reminder that what it all is, what makes it worse, is that what is doing that is emptiness, is invisibility. You can't even see it happening. It'd be bad enough to be attacked like that, but we are being attacked like that by something you can't see. In many ways, it makes the wind sound worse than an air attack, the wind in a storm. Now, incidentally, it's another one that I think gets in the way of the Irish interpretation, because if they're talking about the IRA attacking or whoever attacking, they'd never used bombers in Ireland. It wasn't air attacks, so it doesn't really work. I'm sure if he was writing it, he'd make it a little bit closer to it. But anyway, that's another matter. This all then leads us into the last line. The horror of what the sea does reminds us that this is something to be scared of. There is no hurrying away from the fear. There is no hiding away. It's not we are prepared so that we don't have to fear it. No, this is terrifying. And it comes across that way. But how interesting to finish with what then feels very different to the rest of the poem, like a philosophical statement because of the way it's introduced with strange. How strange, like it's something he's just pondered. Fear is the central emotion. But as we suggested there, you could look at the way that a huge nothing seems to represent, obviously most likely, the wind. Okay, the air attacking you, it's a huge nothing. But then again, does it reflect other things? So a reminder how, as we say in the side there, we can never truly know or understand nature. Slight self-deprecation, we're just scared of nothing. It's an ambiguous end, and one you could do an awful lot with. Think of this in terms of its form and its... What do we need to remember? First of all, this is blank verse, okay? Now, that's the kind of thing people look at and then they state in their answers. But what's the point? That's the only thing you'll get anything with. Well, I would say the fact that this is regular and it's rhythmic, but not rhyming. So it's got a sense of organisation, but not too organised. Essentially, the organisation with the chaos inside it, same as their approach to the storm. Loads of alliteration, look for it all the way through, which means sound is so important. And of course, sound is essentially part of what it's about at the end, the emptiness, and just trying to hear things and judge it from there. Now, do also look at the where I said there's no rhyme, it doesn't use regular rhyme, but there's a lot of half rhyme in there, so look at where they come. Deliberate half rhyme, focusing on sound, not quite rhyming, but it's there. Look at the connection between the two. And remember, it's in the present tense. It is not looking back. The sense is the storm is coming. It's not reflecting on an event. It is what keeps happening. Finally, that extended metaphor makes it feel like nature is an opponent to be fought, especially the way it comes in at... So that's... Okay, now the obvious one is the power of nature. And the underlying idea here is that nature, especially wind in this case, is dangerous and destructive, even though it doesn't appear to be. And therefore, the only way to survive as humans is to respect and fear it. Now, this is an obvious contrast with something like Ozymandias, where someone who deliberately kind of confronts nature by building upwards as high as he can. And look who survives. However, on the flip side, it does talk about the power of humanity, as we've said before here, how humans are surviving in this situation. As long as they understand where they are and what they need to do, they can survive. Humans are incredibly resilient. It's almost a testament to the resilience of humanity. And this is another one that deals with emotions because of fear's centrality to this. How fear is great when you can't see your enemy or fight back, but also at the same time, I'd say it's this idea of we just sit tight. What can you do when you're scared? Very little. You just have to let it happen and accept you are scared.